Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm announcing that the NRI session on Internet governance will start in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to get started. So again, I'm going to make a plea to you. Please move as far down front as you can. The acoustics and the lighting will be much improved for us to be able to see you. So if it's not too inconvenient, if some of you that are in the back don't mind, move down closer to the front. The first 2 rows here are reserved for the speakers, and you'll see their tent cards. But any other seat behind that, we'd love to have you move down closer, and we'll get started in 3 minutes. My name is Marilyn Cade. I'm acting as the floor manager to support the NRI session, which means I may come and solve technical problems on the floor at any point. But I'm going to turn this over to our 2 co-moderators. I just want to remind everyone that this session is going to be very fast-paced, and the speakers will be speaking for very short, concise statements before we go to the Q&A period. And you will be able to ask questions during that period using the microphone that is in front of you, which will light up. We were relying on being able to recognize that you have raised your hand to ask a question. So bear with us during the Q&A period to make sure that we get all of your questions. When we get to that period, we'll take all of the questions at one time, and then we will allocate the responses. You will have no more than 1 minute to ask a question, not a statement, but a question. And please make sure that you write out your questions so you can be concise so we can get as many questions as possible. So that's the logistics. I'd like to turn this over to our 2 co-moderators, Ambassador Fonseca and Anya Genko.
Thank you, Marilyn. Let me start by welcoming you to this session and to state very briefly in regard to time that it's a great honor and privilege to moderate this session. Being from Brazil, and we know we take pride in the internet governance for model we have adopted in Brazil back in 1995, which precedes in 10 years the World Summit Information Society recommendation that this should be the way to address internet governance. It's a great pleasure for me, and also being from government, from the diplomatic career, I should say it has been a learning experience all over those years working in a multi-stakeholder ambience, and this has convinced me of the value and of the strength of the model towards making good on the promise that internet governance brings to all of us. With those very brief words, I'd like to turn to my co-moderator to guide us through and set the stage for this session. Anya, please.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Fonseca, and thank you very much for joining this very important session that was prepared over a course of a couple of months by more than 100 national, regional, and youth IGFs on a very important topic. I would also like to thank on behalf of the NRIs to the Ambassador Fonseca for giving us this honor to be with all of us today. Let us very briefly open this session with learning maybe a bit more for those that are not familiar. Who are the national, regional, and youth IGFs, or as we use the acronym, the NRIs, and what do they do? What is the value of the very large network? So I hope you can see a couple of slides that the IGF Secretariat prepared. Maybe to start from the very beginning, from the origin and background of the NRIs in relation to the IGF. As you know, the IGF stems its mandate from the Tunis Agenda, from the paragraph 72, where there is no specific call for something that we call the national, regional, and youth IGFs. Yet they exist. They exist as organic initiatives that spontaneously started to emerging since 2006, since the beginnings of the IGF itself. The IGF Secretariat started the formal recognition process in a bottom-up manner in collaboration with all NRIs from 2011, and we will come later to the final records of the currently existing NRIs. What do the NRIs do? Probably given the fact that you're here at the IGF, you are aware what the IGF is doing and what are the principles, the core values that the IGF adheres to. There is no difference when it comes about the NRIs. They all adhere to the same principles. They are multi-stakeholder, they are bottom-up, open, inclusive, transparent, and non-commercial in establishing the IGF processes for discussing the internet governance pertaining matters on a level of country or a region. There is the NRIs Toolkit, which is a very important document developed in a bottom-up manner by all NRIs that describes better these principles and procedures. And thanks to the NRIs, this is the only still document that is available to all 6 official UN languages on the IGF website. Today, as you can see, we are speaking about a very large group of countries and regions that have their own successful IGF processes. In 2011, we started with 37 NRIs. Today, at this present moment, we're speaking about 111 officially recognized NRIs. As you can see, we have now 80 countries that are running their processes, 17 regions that are running their IGF processes. There are youth communities on a level of country and region that are particularly trying to engage young people in internet governance discussions. And currently 6 countries are under formation, and we're trying to finalize altogether these processes. In this year, more than 70 IGFs happened. They were all very much successful, and on the IGF website, we do share their annual reports where you can learn more about their valuable meetings. As you can see, geographically speaking, there is a well-balanced coverage when it comes about the presence of the national and regional IGFs across continents, or if you want, across the UN regional group, which is how we track the number. The NRI's process of being integrated into the IGF annual program was a journey. Today, I think we can speak about several very important segments of their integration. The first one is this main session that we are currently organizing. It is focused, as you know, on the evolution of internet governance, and the topic was agreed in a bottom-up manner by all NRIs. There are also 5 collaborative sessions where NRIs try to work on a topic of mutual interest, respecting the regional diversity. So far 3 happen. I think we have 2 more in the schedule, and I encourage you to look at the IGF schedule and attend these very interesting sessions. The NRI's coordination session is probably long-term speaking about the objectives that the NRIs as a network would like to achieve, the most important session for the NRIs, but I would say for the wider IGF ecosystem. It will happen today at 1:30 in the room 2. You are all very much invited and welcome to join. This is an open work meeting between all the NRIs between the chair of the MAG, between the interested MAG members, between the representatives of the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and between the IGF Secretariat. We will be discussing how the NRIs can improve the IGF, help advance the process, and how the IGF can help the NRIs. There is the NRIs joint booth at the IGF Village. It's a meeting point of all NRIs with external stakeholders, and I hope you will stop by to chat a bit with the NRIs, and of course I also spend some time there. And finally, very importantly, the NRIs are probably the largest group that collectively and individually contributes to the IGF's intersessional work, to its best practice forums and Connected Enabling the Next Billion, but also advises on how the process can be improved. That would be very quickly about the NRIs. I would like now to turn to Ambassador Fonseca to officially open the substantive part of this session.
Thank you. We will address 4 sets of questions. Those questions, the substance was chosen by the NRIs themselves. So in order to allow for very substantive exchange and very focused exchange, I'd like just to remind the intent and the need for us to be very strict with the time limit of 90 seconds for each intervention. So I read out the first question, which is examples from the NRIs on how the application of the multi-stakeholder model to discuss Internet governance-related matters contributed to development of Internet governance. Is there an impact on policies from the Internet Governance Forum initiatives? First to speak on this topic will be Brazil, IGF, followed by Nigeria, and UK, IGF. Brazil, you have the floor, sir.
Ambassador Benedito. So, the Brazilian IGF is organized by CGI-BR, the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee, which is a multi-stakeholder body in charge of recommending standards and guidelines for the development and use of the Internet in the country. And under that umbrella mission, CGI also runs many other public interest activities and projects that are related to Internet governance. The Brazilian IGF already reached its 8th edition. This year it was held last week in the city of Goiânia. And within its history, the forum was held in different regions of Brazil, always attracting hundreds of attendees. The forum has plenty of great achievements in its history, and I will highlight some of them here, which illustrate how its multi-stakeholder model brought very concrete contributions to public policies in Brazil. As a first main example, the forum was an important platform in the discussion of the main Internet regulation framework in Brazil, a law known as Marco Civil, serving as a fundamental arena for debates and society mobilization to influence legislative proceedings. The government representatives participate in the forum with other stakeholders to learn about society expectations and interact with the multiple actors before and after the approval of the law. The second edition of the forum held the first public reading of a Marco Civil draft bill report by a representative of the Brazilian parliament. As an additional example, the 4th edition of the forum was a very important moment for evaluating the Net Mundial event held in Brazil in 2014. In that year, the Brazilian IGF took place right after Net Mundial and became the main arena where the local stakeholders discussed Net Mundial results, dynamics, and challenges. As a third example, in 2015, civil society individuals and organizations gathered at the 5th Brazilian Internet Forum consolidated a final statement on the future of the Internet in Brazil, where stakeholders expressed all their concerns about policy and regulation of the Internet in the country, especially with regard to the governmental decree that was about to be approved towards the regulation of Marco Civil rules envisaged in the law previously enacted. As a final example, in 2017, the forum was the main stage for a national public consultation on the Brazilian Internet governance model, with an all-day-long public hearing dealing with the consultation access. Also in 2017, the event was an important place to foster the multi-stakeholder dialogue on privacy and data protection issues, also serving as a platform for disclosing a civil society campaign about privacy and personal data. Those activities were crucial for the, at the time, ongoing discussions of the Brazilian privacy and data protection draft bill, which was finally approved in 2018 by the Brazilian parliament. So thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Thank you for providing those examples on how the national IGF has been closely linked with developments that are taking place in Brazil in regard to internet governance. Next on my list is Nigeria. You have the floor, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador. And I am Mary Uduma from Nigeria Internet Governance Forum. First, I want to say that the Nigeria Internet Governance Forum MAG is composed of people from the ministry, private sector, civil society, academia, and technical community. That's the first, and is endorsed by the Ministry of Communication, which supervises the ICT industry. 2015 recommendations made by Internet Governance Forum, Nigeria Internet Governance Forum, led to the establishment of a task force that will look at all the recommendations and implement them. Some of them have turned to policies in our country. Then the model is now adopted in child online protection process. So there's a multi-stakeholder model coming together to look at the policies and programs of the child online protection in Nigeria. Then the cybersecurity policy and strategy was a multi-stakeholder process. So all the players, actors were there to be able to make contributions to that. Then there are stakeholder engagements nowadays in whatever Nigeria does. Policy development, they want to invite many people to be part of it. As today, there's an expert group on data protection, GDPR, and is a multi-stakeholder program. And in regulating, the regulator cannot complete a regulation without inviting others, so multi-stakeholder model is also accepted. And policies on our .ng, that is the CCTLD, is a multi-stakeholder process. And when the .gov.ng policy was developed, .gov, that is the one that would involve the government. The government had to invite all stakeholders to be part of that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigeria. Thank you, Madam, for also giving those concrete examples. They are very illustrative of the value of the national IGF. UK is next on my list.
Thank you, Ambassador. My name is Nick Wenburn-Smith, and I'm representing the Secretariat for the UK Internet Governance Forum. Our national IGF for the United Kingdom is a multi-stakeholder discussion forum. We have participants from many parts of civil society, but also importantly from business and from government. So we have the Internet Society local chapter, we have the British Computer Society, and we have sort of leading consultancies and opinion formers as part of our organising committee. We are obviously a discussion forum, and we don't formulate policy or set recommendations for our government. So I think the first question speaks about, well, what examples of there have been a direct impact on policy, and we can't say that there has been a direct impact on policy, but what we can say is because we're in the same room as our government, which does make the laws in the UK, we do have discussions with them. And so if we look at the modern sort of scandals and topical issues in the UK, we talk about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook, and in the last year's IGF we did actually have a panel including representatives from Facebook where they could explain their position and be subjected to questions from everybody, including civil society and government actors as well. So it's a very open and transparent process, free to access, anyone can attend, and topical issues are obviously given full oxygen and light. And we don't know yet what is going to be the response in terms of the policy on those difficult questions. Similarly, Russian funding on the Brexit referendum, that was another topic of discussion last year. But we do know that these are actively in debate and discussion, and there will be initiatives come forward, put forward by our government, and we do know that the people making those decisions will have been at the Internet Governance Forums, so there will be an indirect impact, even if it's quite a small one. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, UK. And although you said there is no maybe direct link, but we can see from your report there are relevant initiatives and relevant work being done in this context, and I also commend you for that. I will turn for my co-moderator to guide us through the next question.
So it goes without a doubt that we all face challenges, and that is the focus of the second policy question that reads, what are the challenges we face while engineering or developing and implementing the multi-stakeholder model for discussing the internet governance pertaining matters? And on this very complex question, I would like to invite the colleagues from the Asia-Pacific Regional IGF to share their inputs.
Thank you, Anya. This is Yanis from the Secretariat of the Asia-Pacific Regional IGF. I also would like to speak on behalf of the Asia-Pacific Youth IGF as well on this topic. So we mentioned last year as well when we talk about the SS. So in terms of in the Asia-Pacific region, there are actually the cultural and social factors that played a very strong role in it. So this year we had our 9th meeting in Port Vila, which is a Pacific island in Vanuatu. Vanuatu is the Pacific island. And so we witnessed there are some Pacific cultures there that they will adopt very traditionally, they have this hierarchical approach when it comes to decision-making process and the discussions. So there are some challenges with how the civil society or the public can participate in these discussions, and also the gender inequality issues as well that we saw there. And particularly on the youth participants, the young Pacific Island participants, they also highlight that there are a need for the increased access, education, and the capacity building effort, because many of them actually, they're unaware what the internet was and how it worked, so let alone how the governance were managed, since most of them, their experience with internet is only with specific platforms that they could use and limited to that. So therefore, if we need a true engagement, we need some knowledge and capacity building there, so in order to make a meaningful engagement to be happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the APR IGF. If we could move to the Colombian IGF to see whether you share the same inputs or if you have differences.
Thank you. I will speak in Spanish.
During the 5th Internet Governance Forum in Colombia, there was a dialogue on challenges to many stakeholders in order to answer the question of the political influence, with the participation of representatives of government organizations, universities, the private sector, and civil society. Each of the sectors reported on the challenges that it faced. From the private sector, the main challenge has to do with the model of multiple stakeholders and their ability to have an impact on public policy. In general, there's a framework of recognition for internet governance and how to improve the dialogue and strengthen the dialogue, and how to organize in order to discuss with society in an organized way for the construction of public policy, in addition to the constitutional framework, so that those policies are accepted by the multiple stakeholders. From the government's point of view, it was recognized that one of the challenges was to achieve participation by many sectors in defining public policy. However, it's important clearly to say that it is a multi-stakeholder model. For example, a single civil society organization cannot represent all of civil society. It is therefore important to strengthen the bodies in which the multi-stakeholder approach is expressed, and the implications on internet governments, as Colombia should reach the different stakeholders, train them, and invite them to participate so that more voices could be heard from the university point of view. The main problem is a lack of knowledge on the internet, and it's important to raise as a challenge how to integrate the different regions of the country and how to reach the public that's impacted and how to involve them in participation. It's important to involve universities to a greater extent with the definition of public policy to achieve cooperation between public and private universities. And when it comes to internet governments, the participation of different faculties is essential. When it comes to groups of youth, there is a lack of confidence on the part of youth due to a lack of experience. However, this has begun changing. There are young people who cannot participate for financial reasons, which limits the activities that require content creation or the provision of meeting rooms. The internet should address subjects of interest for the youth, for example, cybersecurity, the blockchain, social networks. All that needs to be addressed in order to build new capacity and draw the attention of the youth. From the civil society, it should be recognized that models of representativity are at times empty. Who are the representatives of those who aren't connected, of people in remote areas? Often these are the populations that are in greatest need of public policy. The Internet Government Initiative should have
floor monitor role and comment that we really need the comments to be limited to 90 seconds so we can get to the rest of our colleagues, and if we could move to the next speaker.
Thank you, Mel. Maybe, Julian, you can wrap up in the 10 seconds if there's something that should be also addressed. Thank you very much. I do think that you raised very important points: capacity building, raising awareness. How do you ensure that you have full inclusivity in the country or region is very difficult and challenging. But I know, for example, the Italian IGF is rarely in the capital of the country for those reasons. So can we hear from the Italian IGF colleagues on this?
Good morning. My name is Francesco Pirro, and I work for an Italian digital agency that this year promotes the IGF initiative. In the past years, the debate on internet governance in Italy, while based on a multi-stakeholder approach, was limited to a restricted number of references. In 2018, there have been efforts to have an event that would be more adherent to international principles of openness, transparency, and inclusiveness. It was held a Day Zero event dedicated to Italian youth IGF initiative and a general effort of a greater involvement of the average citizen. The results have been positive, with 22 workshop proposals presented with a bottom-up process, but there are still challenges. These are: 1, have more donors and funds for the event. Without funds, the forum cannot grow and reach its potential. 2, the need for a better communication and advertisement of the event through platform in order to increase awareness. 3, broader involvement of high-level politicians and government representatives. 4, availability of tools and platforms for spreading internet governance topic and collecting the results from the debate. Thank you.
Thank you. We will continue hearing statements in regard to the second policy question. I have on my list Japan, followed by LAC IGF and Southeastern Europe IGF. And I'd like just to recall that the ground rules that were set by you were that the intervention should be restricted to 90 seconds in order to ensure the opportunity for all of you to intervene. So, Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. My name is Keisuke Kamimura. I am professor at Daito Bunka University in Tokyo. I am speaking here to represent Japan IGF. We have, of course, many challenges, but I don't run through all of them. Let me focus on one issue, which is of much importance to my observation. The challenge for us is scalability in engagement. As the IGF and NRIs are coming to embrace a variety of issues, particularly newer technology-driven policy issues, the substance of the policy discussion can be highly technical and specific. NRIs may not provide the best opportunity for discussion and decision-making. We already have, in Japan, we already have thematic policy groups and fora, whether official or not, who may better deal with these specific issues. And this is particularly true in national internet governance context, where you need to discuss specific details considering local regulatory, industry, and societal environment. As a result, it may be difficult to have a peak national and regional forum deal with all the internet governance pertaining issues. For the last several months in Japan, we have seen an extensive discussion over the introduction of network-level blocking of piracy content. The discussion was conducted in a multi-stakeholder manner, but it took place out of sync with a traditional NRI format. I do not mean to say that all initiatives should come under one umbrella, but we need to engage, and we as a NRI, we need to engage and connect these thematic and other initiatives in a flexible and scalable way and have them talk to us and to each other. An NRI should ideally act as a contact point between the national, regional voices and the global IGF. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Japan, and thank you for bringing to the discussion the need to make sure the complexity of the issues involved maybe require a format that involves beyond the national IGF, other groups that will address thematic issues. Next on my list is LAC IGF, followed by Portugal. LAC IGF, the representative, can take the floor. If LAC IGF is not ready to take the floor at this point, I'd like to turn to Portugal. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. So we had the 8th Portuguese initiative of the IGF, which took place in the city of Aveiro in Portugal on the 17th of October. Well, main challenges. Several stakeholders have difficulties in characterize themselves, meaning in which stakeholder group they can be categorized. Different stakeholders don't cover IGF, so it's very difficult to replicate such discussions at national level. People discuss the several themes, but not from the point of view of the governance. Even the governance of the Portuguese organizers is very difficult, being the financial component one of the challenges. On the other hand, internet governance is a difficult concept, and it is very difficult to attract people for the discussions. So scalability and engagement are great challenges as well. Eventually, we don't try to find consensus, as we are still at a stage where people seek to understand what the governance of the internet is and what is expected from them. And we had this year the 8th Portuguese initiative. Still, we have always messages coming from each Portuguese session on internet governance, which I think is a very good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Muito obrigado, my colleague and friend from Portugal, for your statements. Last on my list for this policy question two, I was told Southeastern Europe will not intervene anymore, but in case the representative is in the room, I could give the floor and also to LAC IGF. So the last remaining speaker would be Shad. Shad, you have the floor.
Okay, merci beaucoup, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Azrin Bashad, Executive Secretary of IGF Chad. With respect to our contribution, let me cut right to the chase, respecting our contribution in awareness raising and engagement. During the IGF, we always organize workshops on cybersecurity, for example, on the contribution of the internet to communities. Well, we had our first IGF in 2015. There was a lot of participation, and we had crucial support from the Ministry of the Post. There were nearly 483 participants, so we could see that there was a lot of enthusiasm in our country to the IGF. The third meeting was held on November 27, 2017, and that was on internet governance in Chad. What is the system of internet governance in Chad? We had support from the IGF Secretariat and other members. It was a total success. 200 participants. They learned about internet governance, security, and e-commerce, which is very important to give more job opportunities to our youth. After the first IGF, we set up a local organization with 23 members involving the different ministries, the regulators, the academy, the university in Jamnima. In terms of specific problems, there's the problem of financing and also hosting. Where is the Secretariat to be hosted? That's a big problem. The Secretariat is currently hosted in ISO, Chad, but we're currently working with the ministry in order to get an official headquarters, which would lend greater weight to the IGF. We have to organize training sessions as well for people really to understand what the IGF is all about. We can share our experience through this meeting with the local community. We have to report back to the communities. We have to organize small training sessions with the different stakeholders. What is the impact of the government? What is the impact of the private sector? Involving the private sector is the real problem, particularly the mobile operators. If we have the support of government, the universities, well, they offer us rooms to hold our workshops. So that is what I can add in a few words. Thank you very much.
Merci. Je vous remercie de
Let me thank you for your comments.
At this point, to summarize all the comments we have been listening to, there will be a moment we'll do that. I'd like then to turn to my co-moderator to guide us through policy question 3.
Thank you very much. So continuing with the third policy question, we will be discussing how can we improve the implementation of the multi-stakeholder model on the national and regional levels. And we have quite a number of the NRIs that will share their valuable inputs with us. So I advise that we start with the Spanish IGF firstly.
Thank you, Anya. My name is Zoraida Frias, and I'm here on behalf of the Spanish IGF. I would like to start with something that came up in our last meeting, because we held a special session to celebrate our 10th anniversary, and in that discussion we were talking about, well, throughout all the event, we were talking about newer and emerging technologies. So the concept I would like to introduce is the idea of technological or technology governance. And we were discussing whether we need to introduce this concept, like moving from internet governance to technology governance. And with that, it would be maybe helpful to reach a wider audience working in emerging things that are not only identified with the internet, but with, and I'm talking about artificial intelligence, blockchain, connected cars, and other emerging technologies. And these technologies pose additional challenges for the multi-stakeholder model. In a moment, we are discussing if we need to move to more concrete outcomes. So that won't be an easy path, and so our view is that the technologies are out there and we need to do something. So meanwhile, we may want to focus on developing light and flexible approaches to govern these new technologies, not only the internet. And in that regard, code of conduct, something like more general, may be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the Spanish IGF. If we could hear from the Ukrainian IGF now.
My name is Salle. I work for Internews Ukraine and I represent Ukrainian IGF. The next year it will be 10 years since the first IGF Ukraine happened. And we decided as a committee of IGF Ukraine to transform the nature of the event to make it more appealing to general public. In fact, this year we conducted both IGF Ukraine and Youth IGF. It was 2 days of events. And we decided to name it under the brand of Days of Ukrainian Internet. And still the core of the events were IGF and its former and multi-stakeholder approach. But we decided that if you talk in public about IGF, nobody understands what is happening. It's a very complicated name for general public, and we wanted to bring more attention of journalists, human rights defenders, new government institutions. Those we suggested to make it more popular branding for our events. And the core issues for the discussions in Ukraine were the issue of security and freedom. There are more and more regulations of internet. That's why the stations which took place in Ukraine address the issues of technical part, but also the policy issue. There were a couple of stations regarding advocacy of free internet, digital rights. That was for the first time when we raised these issues. And as always, we talked about DNS, about child protection, and all the issues which shape internet governance in Ukraine. There were representatives of all stakeholders, including government agencies, IT community, and more civil society organizations participate in Ukrainian IGF. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If we could maybe stay somehow within the region and move to the IGF for Southeastern Europe, SIDIG.
Hello, my name is Susanne Herring and I'm a member of the SIDIG Executive Committee. In response to the third policy question, what we're trying to do to improve the implementation of the multi-stakeholder model, on top of first of all, we're working on improving our annual meetings to strengthen it as a platform for multiple stakeholders and for specific discussions on more focused topics. Also, we're increasing the content and the outreach of our capacity development programs, which are towards youth, university students, master students, and professionals working in digital policy and internet-related topics. Also, to engage with different countries in our wide region, we're working on road shows where we will organize events apart from our annual meetings that will focus on the top topics which are on the agenda of specific countries in our region. And finally, improving our outcomes. We already have specific messages from each topic and workshop that we have each year, but we want to make it more specific and evolve them quickly into policy recommendations.
Thank you very much to SIDIG with this important message that we start from our homes, first of all. Could we now move to Argentina IGF and just hear the improvements on the side of your national IGF?
Yes, thank you. My name is Carolina Guerre. I'm a representative of the IGF Secretariat of Argentina, which has had 3 editions already. In terms of the improvement of the multi-stakeholder model in our experience, we see that connecting policy discussions with other national and regional IGFs is a relevant outcome to enhance the visibility of this multi-stakeholder model, particularly because in many countries in South America, the idea of transparency and accountability in the policy development process is not embedded in many of these institutional developments. And one thing that we have discussed, two things that we have discussed in the last year with great prominence is really to start focusing now on the national IGF as a process rather than as an event. We raised this already last year within this main session, but we are now really seeing that if we don't work in this format, we will become obsolete as an initiative because so many relevant internet governance discussions are not being part and feeding into the national IGF process. And lastly, it's the difficulty to frame the interest of a particular stakeholder group within different themes. Sometimes we find that it might be a corset, it might be a framework that is not necessarily working when you want to engage with certain internet governance topics and saying, oh, we have a representative from civil society here and someone from this other sector might not be the best way to promote a discussion, and maybe theme-based discussions with experts and orientation to guide those discussions might be another interesting principle, but which we need to address in order to get more feedback, but also to take into consideration the balance and the diversity that the multi-stakeholder model is, of course, is a key asset of the multi-stakeholder internet governance model. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the Argentina IGF. Well, we're going to go back to Europe. It seems Europe is most interested to address these improvements. Belarus IGF.
Thank you, Anya. My name is Helen Beliska. I represent the organizers of Belarus IGF, hosted by company. Belarus IGF was held this year for the third time, and in our country we are overcoming the stereotype that internet is the sphere of responsibility of only the technical community. Understanding of this fact that is still rather new for our country gathers around 500 representatives of different stakeholder groups on the Belarus IGF each year. Speaking about the improvement of multi-stakeholder model implementation, I would name three main points: raise of awareness, development of local IG community, and enlisting the support of government authorities. These are the ways of improvement that are more than relevant for Belarus, as well as for other initiatives that are starting their ways as we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Going now to Armenia IGF.
Thank you. My name is Leana Galstian from the Armenian IGF. This year we had our fourth annual meeting. We all in NRI's network understand and value the importance of raising awareness and building capacity about the IGF and effectiveness of multi-stakeholder model. And we think a very good way of doing that is the schools on internet governance. We have run already 2 editions of the IGF schools in Armenia dedicated for the university students within the country. And the rewarding result was the actual involvement and participation of young people in the process of the national IGF. They are raising interest toward emerging issues in the region and the world. Another important aspect is the collaboration between the IG initiatives in the region. We closely collaborate with our colleagues from the neighboring country, Georgia, by sharing the agenda with each other, speakers, delegates. We also collaborate successfully with colleagues from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. We coordinate the time of our annual meetings, share the good practices and success we achieved, and try to have a common understanding of the challenges we face in the region. And this collaborative network leads to widening the applicability of the multi-stakeholder principle in various areas, demonstrating the value of considering the views and interests of all stakeholders while taking decisions and leading towards new ideas and projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Armenia. Our host country has a very good national process and the government is also very supportive. and I'm glad they're with us, so we will hear inputs from them.
Bonjour à tous et merci Anya.
Yes, thank you, Anya, for your organization. I'm the co-chair of the organizing committee in France and Secretary General of the French Internet Society. We held our last IGF last July. The main issue was to ensure the participation of all. Just to mention two initiatives that we took, first of all, to have a hackathon on operational problems that we want, which is a way of operationalizing the initiative and calling on new participants to take part. We also asked each workshop to make concrete proposals for the digital future. That Global Forum 2018 is being held in Paris with strong support from the community. The first issue was to publicize the specificity of the IGF and the very concept of internet governance. And in particular, this is why we felt it was important to espouse a multi-stakeholder model, which makes it possible to draw links between the different national initiatives and to initiate a thorough cooperation and to allow for an open-ended discussion that can bring forth new subjects and new questions which otherwise might have remained unknown. It's also a way of learning from other local initiatives and thus initiating a comparative approach. Finally, it's a way of bringing the local specificities up to the global level. That's why in France we would like to make the IGF a central platform for exchange amongst the different stakeholders on the digital issues. In other words, a way of ensuring diversity of points of view. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the France IGF. And this policy question will be concluded by the inputs coming from the China IGF.
Thank you, Anya. My name is Lori. I'm from China IGF. 下面我用中文来讲。首先感谢法国政府。
I will now switch to Chinese. I want to thank the host country, France, for extending such a warm welcome to us all. We want to thank you for your cooperation, and in fact we're counting on all of us to cooperate to solve problems. China has seen the democratization of the internet bolstering the quality of life of Chinese people. However, deliberations are not an end in and of themselves. Our goal is to increase living standards in China. And we understand that there's a difference between different members. We don't want to export our standards. We recognize the fact that there's diversity across different countries. This is why we're in favor of the multi-stakeholder approach espoused by the IGF. This year, the President Xi Jinping spoke of multi-partner, multi-stakeholder governance. Governments, private enterprises, and civil societies all have a role to play. Members of all the mechanisms need some kind of platform for brainstorming. And 90 seconds for each and every one of us to report is not sufficient. We need a different mechanism that's more effective, more efficient. We need an Internet Governance Forum that allows and offers opportunities for greater cooperation. A common problem we're all facing is financing our NRIs. And we need some kind of mechanism to resolve that issue instead of counting on transfers of funds. Thank you.
To the colleagues from China IGF. This concluded the third question. I think you have sent very important messages that we should primarily improve the local levels, our homes, national levels, then regional levels, and that's basically the key for improving the global IGF. But I will turn to Ambassador Fonseca for the fourth question, which I think probably we don't have a better person to moderate this question because he's been with the IGF
Thank you, Anya. Very kind of you. Actually, policy question 4 is more a theme for reflection than a question in itself. We'll hear 4 representatives speaking to that topic, which is multi-stakeholder model on a global level, current status and recommendations for improvements. We will hear Africa IGF, followed by Eurodig, IGF USA, and Russia. First on my list, Africa IGF, you have the floor.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Makan Fai from the African Regional IGF. We held an annual conference from 4 to 6 November successfully in Khartoum, Sudan. On this question, which is a reflection as Ambassador Fonseca has stated, we will start by saying that there is no need for a global government, but for a global governance. In the past, the UN worked like a federation of governments, as it was the primary international arena for governments to make decisions and collective actions with little or no involvement from other stakeholders on the decision-making process. However, this has been changing since 2002, even though the changes are slow. And we give examples. The members of the NGO Committee on Financing for Development, who ardently reaffirmed their support for the multi-stakeholder financing for development follow-up and implementation process set out in the Monterey Consensus. This was also censored in as the Doha Declaration. The approach of the Monterey Consensus to fully include involvement of civil society was endorsed and repeated in other UN conferences. However, as you all have noted, the World Summit on the Information Society stands out after the UN General Assembly decided in its resolution GR 56/183 that this conference should be organized as a multi-stakeholder event. I think this was the first time this had happened. And the summit was labeled as innovation and critical juncture in global governance. The underlying view was that the WSIS provided an unprecedented design for political access of non-state actors to decision-making bodies and agenda settings arenas in the UN. That has never happened before. And the UN being the only truly global organization, it should embed the WSIS model in its history and provide an analytical framework for its generalization in the UN arena. On the future of IGF, multi-stakeholderism is growing in the UN, and this is held by all actors, including the UN Secretary General, who indicated yesterday. You must be more than multi-stakeholder, you must also be multidisciplinary. And when we talk about the future of IGF, I think the future is a bit clear. In France has invited this year's conference. Next year, Germany has invited. This shows a sign of vitality and relevance for IGF. In addition, the French President, Mr. Macron, had requested yesterday the UN Secretary General to make sure that the IGF is anchored at the highest level of the UN system. We have all heard that. And in his turn, the UN Secretary General wants transformed output from the IGF. He said discussions on internet governance cannot just remain discussions. Policy and where relevant normative frameworks must be developed to ensure impact. So I think if you hear what the Secretary General has said, we need to go further and make sure that we put up decisions which are implemented or used by member states. And finally, he further indicated, you have support from UNDESA and from a wide community of regional and national IGFs. You can count on my support in this journey towards a proper, safe and digital future. And most of all, know that you are making a difference. So I think the future of IGF is clear. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I'd like to turn immediately, in the interest of time, to hear comments from Eurodig, followed by IGF USA. Eurodig, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Sandra Hoferichter. I'm the Secretary General of EuroDIC, which is the European IGF. I would like to reflect on the current status and maybe give some recommendations for improvement, but I think this actually needs a broader discussion on the improvements. I joined a lot of discussion about internet governance and the sustainability of the multi-stakeholder model this year, and I learned that in some languages the term internet governance is difficult to translate, even misunderstood, or even worse, it keeps people away from discussing it. Governance is just very close to government, and this is really an issue in some languages. Also, I found out that when discussing to people that are not in our governance bubble, it's hard to explain what we are actually doing. And so I started to change my language a bit, and what I found so far is we are shaping our digital future. It's a bit broader than just internet governance. It includes all aspects like ethical, economical, technical, regulatory, but it's not limited to a network of computers, but it includes a human aspect and is also a bit forward-looking. I cannot yet tell you if if this change in terminology will help to attract more stakeholders to commit to the multi-stakeholder model. I'm just convinced that this model is the best to move forward with. In this respect, I want to urge all of us, we cannot miss one stakeholder group when developing our digital future. And the WSIS definition has not lost its actuality, and I would just read them again to recall this definition, because I really think it's very important. Internet governance is the development and application by governments, the private sector and civil society in their respective roles of shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and use of the internet. This definition leaves, of course, space for interpretation. For instance, what are the respective rules of stakeholder? Do we need for each discussion, for each decision, every stakeholder on the table? Or can this be distributed? But to define this question is part of the open-ended multi-stakeholder process, as well as to agree on the principles, norm, rules, and decision-making procedures. I think we as the NRI have the power to make a difference and make the outcomes of the IGF more relevant. I think we should build a bridge from one IGF to the other, in this respect from Paris to the IGF in Berlin next year. EuroDIC as the regional forum will certainly be a pillar of that bridge, but such a bridge needs much more than one pillar to be stable. And therefore I call upon all NRIs to help making a difference. How can we build that bridge? I have some ideas, but I keep continuing reaching out to my colleagues and getting more ideas. We have some tools with the messages, best practice forums that allow for intersessional work. And then a last point, I think we should also promote more actively the concrete examples how cooperation started at the national or regional IGF and bring that to the attention of others. The UN panel on digital cooperation is just calling for input, and I think for us as NRIs that's a great opportunity to submit which kind of concrete examples came out of the national debate and led to concrete action. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. I'll turn to IGF USA.
Thank you, Ambassador. My name is Marilyn Cade. I'm going to speak as the Chief Catalyst of IGF USA for the next 90 seconds. I'm going to focus just specifically on the two questions that we were asked to consider and look ahead. There are many, many things that I could say, some of which are very consistent with what has been said, but I want to just make a very clear point that we understand at IGF USA that we're very different from any other national and also regional or sub-regional IGF just by nature of our location of being in North America and having a concentration of resources, of think tanks and other entities that do not exist in a lot of other parts of the world. We also have a very strong presence of technical corporations and other resources. That puts us in a very unique position sometimes to consider what the future holds. The other thing that may be unique about us is that many of the policy representatives of major corporations work in any way that they are able to in the UN organizations when stakeholder engagement is allowed. So we tend to have a lot of presence and experts who are experienced in working with UNESCO, UNDP, ITU, on and on and on, which is a challenge in a lot of places where the business interest is not well developed enough to want to focus on also working at the global level. I think the functioning of the multi-stakeholder model in the UN context is, I would say, embryonic and varies from UN agency to UN agency. There's been some experimentation going on, and Ambassador Fonseca himself chaired 2 working groups at the Commission on Science and Technology for Development that were a pilot in including stakeholders in a fora that was previously government only. But I think we're just at the real beginning stage of how we evolve the multi-stakeholder model for participation in the UN context. I do think the future of the IGF is at a stage when we all need to consider the changing internet ecosystem around us. And again, I'm speaking as a position that has been discussed within the IGF USA, and consider what changes that we can make while protecting the core that was the commitment of launching the IGF, but also consider how the model evolves to be responsive and takes into account more inclusion, more participation, and particularly more informed participation, and diversifies it and makes it more localized. We are not in a position to comment at this point on speeches that were made in only the last few days, but I am in a position to say that we begun to study it. Thanks.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you for your kind reference to previous work. And let me just comment briefly that I'm very comfortable in working both in a multilateral and a multi-stakeholder setting. I think, and this is, if I can just refer to the position the Brazilian government takes on this, there is no inherent contradiction, because we want to make sure we can use the resources available, and the same effort we make to bring more government participation, multi-stakeholder formats, we invest the same effort into trying to make multilateral formats also more permeated to non-governmental stakeholders. So thank you very much for this reference. Last on my list would be Russia, IGF, and then I'll turn to my co-moderator to guide us through the second part of our meeting. Russia, you have the floor.
Thank you, IGF. I will speak in Russia. Уважаемые коллеги.
Esteemed colleagues, the multi-stakeholder model is today, deservedly so, considered to be the best way for managing distributed structures at the global level. In Russia, the internet is developing thanks to our talented engineers, our young people, and the Soviet School of Scientists. As a result, we have competitive services that are well known far beyond Russia's borders. Technology has a lot of potential for countering potential cyber threats. However, countering these threats require technology companies, the government, international organizations and civil societies to act in concert and to communicate better. Russia is open for dialogue. All Russian stakeholders are taking a very active part in our efforts to cooperate with international organizations. We're also working at the parliamentary level. Our law enforcement authorities are cooperating with our international and foreign counterparts, and of course we're taking part in the work of international organizations. including the intergovernmental group of experts under the auspices of the UN. We took part in the UN General Assembly work, and in fact, Russia's resolution on governing the internet was adopted just last week. It calls on us to take into consideration the UN Charter when regulating the internet to combat cyber attacks and other illicit activities carried out on the internet. On many occasions, we've heard proposals for a new cyber UN, a new international organization working in cyberspace to protect us from attacks. The Russian Federation has been an unswerving supporter of efforts to discuss the idiosyncrasies of the internet, especially efforts to counter cyber attacks, and these efforts all under the auspices of the UN, especially the ITU. We believe that current efforts are insufficient, especially the role of the government needs to be bolstered as we discuss these very sensitive, pivotal initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rasha, for your statement. Anya?
Thank you very much for excellent inputs. I think the purpose of the NRIs is to learn from each other, and I think you gave a lot of subjects on this particular session that we will be thinking more also in the future. We don't have a lot of time left, to be honest, in terms of the formal reserved time, but I think we can, there's nothing after us here, so we can maybe stay a couple of minutes more, just to hear whether you have questions. So we are now opening the floor for the questions, including the speakers and, of course, those that did not speak but would like to ask questions to our speakers. Please, if you could maybe raise your hand, that's going to be the easiest to follow the queue. And our floor manager is advising me that we may not be able to respond to all questions, but we will try to take all the questions at once, try to aggregate them, summarize them, and maybe respond to as many as possible.
Let me just remind you, because it's so dark in here, if you want to ask a question, I would suggest you both wave and turn your microphone on so we can try to recognize you.
Of course, you can also comment or suggest. I do see one hand there, so can we give the floor? I'm sorry, I don't see whether you have the nameplate, but if you could say your name and share your comment. Yes, please.
Hello? Anja, I'm Kosi. Je suis Kosi.
I'm Kosi from Benin. I'm the Vice Chair of the Internet Governance Forum in Benin. It's very interesting to hear us discussing the challenges looming over us, future challenges looming over Internet governance, and the fact that we're doing this through different prisms. As a representative of a developing country, we believe that we still need to think about who the internet belongs to. Are governments participating in civil society discussions? The private sector believes that this doesn't concern them because it's not about earning money. So there are all sorts of assumptions that all of the players, all of the actors harbor about each other. Therefore, do you think that this model will remain viable unless we restore trust, or what we like to call trust? After all, governments don't want to do any evil. They don't want to harm the internet. They don't want to harm civil society. Civil society is, after all, acting in the public interest, which the government also seeks to promote. And as for businesses are the main service providers, offering services to the populace at large. Very often we're told that the internet boils down to promoting the interests of us all. But what about businesses? Will businesses be earning money by coming to the IGF. We want to be able to respond to businessmen and women asking us this question. What do businesses get from coming to the IGF if they don't make additional revenue? Of course, states might be reassured by the fact that the IGF addresses issues which speak to the heart of state sovereignty. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the Benin IGF. Is there a next question or a comment? Yes, please. And if I could just kindly ask you to limit your comments to 1 minute, as we're very short on time. Thank you. So, yes.
Hi, this is Lilian Naroga from the Uganda IGF. Mine is just really not a comment, just an intervention. Probably I should have submitted earlier. I coordinate the Uganda Internet Governance Forum, and probably to respond to my colleague from Benin is the issue of multi-stakeholderism. I think just to give a bit of a history that Uganda, we've had the Internet Governance Forum since 2006. And with time, we see different entities coming on board and dropping off. This year, we had the business coming in, usually business stakeholders come in as individual entities. So yes, there's still a challenge of interesting businesses like telecoms or ISPs to be able to feed into these discussions. But from our region, what we usually see from Uganda is the actual involvement of the government into feeding into these processes. And for us, that is a positive, because when we look at the internet governance in our country, we usually see that most of the negative issues usually arise from government. So I think from Africa, I think we need to get more involvement from governments to feed into our processes. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lillian. If we could go here up front.
Good afternoon. My name is Adil Suleiman. I'm with the African Union Commission. I hear that there is a lot of discussion about IGF reform, right? And just wondering from the UN standpoint, are we going to have some recommendations? And if so, what would be the timeline for those recommendations about the reform? Or this is just an initial discussion?
Thank you. Can we have a next question? We will respond later to that one. No, I don't see any raised hands, whether somebody would like to submit a comment or a question. Yes, sorry.
Peter Tonolli from Electronic Frontiers Australia. We in Australia are looking at starting a regional IGF. Again, one theme that I've noticed in the work that I've done, and from what I've heard from today's session, is that perhaps the term governance is dated. It worked in the past, but perhaps we need to consider a rebrand to garner bigger contributions from the public, civil society, government and private enterprise, and to have a greater alignment with what an IGF actually does.
Thank you. I think we have from Alejandra a comment.
Gracias.
Thank you, Anya. I'm Alejandro Ramos from the government of Uruguay, and I'm a member of the executive secretariat of the Uruguayan IGF. I'd like to come back to something that Carolina from Argentina said, which I think is very important. The national IGFs need to consolidate. We're getting more and more IGFs, more and more representativeness. And for me, it's important to take care of the quality of the dialogue within the IGFs. Carolina referred to this. It's important for the discussions to be held within the IGF. And I think that this is just as important as the dialogue with outside parties regarding internet governance. Thank you.
Any last comments or questions? Yes, all the way up.
Hello, my name is Natasha Glavar. I'm coming from Croatian IGF, and I just wanted to mention that we had our national IGF a few weeks ago, and I'm happy to say that this year, on this year's IGF, this is the first time that we had highly positioned Croatian officers, government representatives, and I hope it will raise the awareness of the IGF on our national and level, and importance of the IGF principles, primarily multi-stakeholderism and equal footing that hopefully could be introduced into our national and local debates on collaboration and on important issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Any other comments, questions? I see one hand there, and after that, Sonia. Yes.
Oui, bonjour, je suis simplement... Yes, thank you very much, Isabelle Vatier. I'm a student studying internet governance issues, and I just wanted to pick up on what was said by the Eurodig delegate. I completely agree. It's right to underscore this issue of terminology vis-à-vis our collective thinking of it. These terms, this terminology, might scare off certain people, resulting in distrust, something that was flagged up by some of the speakers. And it's true. I think if we debunk these misconceptions, that could be most useful for civil society, for all of us, so that the word governance is no longer associated with control, but rather with collaboration, multiplication, and participation. So I think it might be worthwhile to think about the terminology that we use, the terms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sonia?
Thank you. I want to speak or ask a question with my Youth IGF Turkey coordinator hat on. I know that there are 14 recognized youth initiatives which are also available on the IGF website, but there are also other youth IGF movements who, I mean, different movements, but I was thinking how can we streamline this for better effectiveness the way NRIs are streamlined? Because there are youth interest sessions or youth IGF movement sessions that were communicated to IGF-recognized youth IGFs at all. And I think this compartmentalization is harming increased impact, considering there are only a few of us anyway.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I do see one hand up. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Thomas Gunn. I'm from Pan-African University, Governance, Humanities and Social Sciences. My comment is to the African IGF. Of course, there is a good progress on the African IGF by conducting continuous IGF forums, particularly in the last 5 or 6 years. But my point is, in Africa, almost only 22% of the population has an access to the internet or the cyber landscape. And I think for Africa, the main point must be on how to bridge the digital divide. So what's your comment on this? Or what are the initiatives on this, on the bridging the digital divide in the continent? Thank you.
Can we, I know Marilyn is here giving me guidance that we should maybe wrap up. Can we take this as a last comment from you? Yes. And then I think Marilyn will summarize everything for us.
Thank you so much. My name is Roman Chukov from the Russian Federation, newly elected MAC member. So it was really important, several points about the internet governments, and I really think that we need universal code of conduct in internet or some sort of framework, legal basis and framework agreements which will really fix the responsibilities of all stakeholders with regard to internet governance. Thank you.
Thank you. While Marilyn is turning on her mic, there was a question there. Can you be very quick in a couple of seconds?
Hello, my name is Mam Aizat. I'm representing a youth group from the Gambia called Give One Project. We've been attending the IGF for a couple of times, and it has been really helping because we've been having these programs, coding, like teaching our young girls in Gambia on coding, technology introductions and everything. But I understand that the IGF, I don't think it's that strong like in Gambia. I'm also working in a GSM company whereby internet is very expensive in Gambia. Due to the liberalization of the gateways are not they are not complete. So with that, I don't know how IGF would really help in making things easy in that area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now over to Marilyn.
So in the next 3 minutes, I'm going to try to summarize how I propose that we address the questions we've received. I'm going to make an observation. We designed, the NRIs themselves designed in a bottom-up way this session, and the limitation of time was always on our mind as a major barrier. Yet the networking, or I should say the exchange of views and the building of the NRI network is strengthened by each of these engagements that we have. What you've provided to us to think about is what will need to go into the messages that come out of the, we provide messages, each of the sessions provide messages that reflect into the chairman's summary, but there will also be a summary of this meeting. And what I'm going to propose to the co-chairs is that we can't respond individually to each of these, but that we make a commitment that we will put into our report the questions and statements that have been made, that have come forward, and then we will also take them, Anya, into the NRI network for a specific call that you would establish where we could discuss these topics and others. And then there would be our report coming out of that session that all of the participants would be able to access online and read. But it would also give us a chance to take more inputs. I am going to make a comment about one specific question. There has been an ongoing process of evolving the IGF. There has been a process within the Commission on Science and Technology for Development at the request of the UN Secretary General to put together a working group, and that took about 18 months. Then there were 2 other working groups that I made reference to. And I think one of the things we might want to discuss, because we cannot change a negotiated document from heads of state, the Tunis Agenda, but we can certainly make recommendations for evolution in how the next 7 years of the IGF evolves, and the enhancements that have been identified here are the kinds of things that could be discussed in a broader, more inclusive environment. So it would be sort of a look at what the multi-year strategy for evolving both the global IGF process, but the national IGF process.
Marilyn, thank you very much. I would just like to say that we had a number of interventions from the online participants, but due to the, unfortunately, lack of time, we will not be able to address them, but we will take them all in this written report that Marilyn was talking about. This will be basically the output of this session to the wider community, where the NRIs will also expand on this topic within that report.
Thank you. I'd like to very briefly comment. I was very glad in participating in this session. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I think having been part of the organizing team of Net Mundial, it just occurred to me how complex it is to put in place a format, multi-stakeholder format that aims to produce outcomes. And I think when we are seeking to enhance the value of national and regional IGFs, we are talking about making those mechanisms a tool for outcome-oriented discussions. And I think what we have been listening in this session just elicits the complexities involved in involving more participants beyond these, the natural participants, those that are insiders of those discussions, and also how to address topics, although in a comprehensive way, but also with some very focused approach, because internet governance involves everything. So, and we see there are different approaches. So we've heard some people saying we don't need global governance. On the other parts, there are calls for specific mechanisms to be instituted. So, and also this discussion also relates to what is going on in intergovernmental fora. So what I take from this, and my message for you, if I may, and I would like to abuse my position as the chair, and this being my last IGF, I'd like to just share my reflection that what you have been doing, it has a value in itself, even in face of the difficulties and complexities and the challenges. It is, as we look at the evolution and in numbers and quality of national and regional IGFs, in itself, it is something of tremendous value from the perspective of ensuring and providing the platform for decisions, for actions to be more inclusive, more sustainable, because they are grounded not in one perspective, in one stakeholder perspective, even if it is the government's perspective that has this public, the role to make sure public interest is served, but any discussion, any process will be enriched when, if it can benefit from the other stakeholders institutionally, and on the contrary, if this is lacking, decisions may fail and may be fragile. So I'm again very happy. I think the value of what you have been doing is tremendous. I'd like to thank Marilyn for this proposal to provide some way forward in the discussions we have had here, to provide for more interactive debate. We have not, unfortunately, have the opportunity at this point in time due to the limit we have to follow, but I would certainly encourage you to go on. And being from a country that has been implementing a multi-stakeholder model that precedes even the consensus that emerged in the World Summit on Information Society, I am more than glad with what I see today, and I certainly encourage you to move forward. And I applaud and commend your work. Thank you.
I will give you the final word, yes. I would like to thank Ambassador Fonseca, first of all, as I said, for honoring us to moderate this challenging session in terms of very difficult topic, and also a number of speakers, of course, add to that. But I think it ended up to be an excellent session. And I would like to thank to every single NRI for being here, for participating actively in this session, but primarily for working very hard throughout the year to prepare this session. This session is prepared in a completely bottom-up manner across 100 NRIs, which is very difficult, but it's also gives a hope that the internet governance really has its own sustainability when it comes about the long-term future. And finally, as I said, this session is very complex to prepare. It's probably even more complex to report out from it, because you said many things which may be even different. So I would like to thank our rapporteurs, Dustin Phillips and Nick Wimban-Smith from IGF USA, Dustin and Nick from IGF UK, that will help us to produce a set of concrete messages from this session that will go out tonight probably to the wider IGF community as messages from NRIs collectively on this important topic. And finally, giving the final say to Marilyn and thanking her for helping us to manage the floor.
I hope this mic is working. Yes. Please stay in your seats. For the next 7 minutes, we're going to have a surprise event. My name is Marilyn Cade.
And my name is Irina Danele.
We are joining with others from the community and the NRI community to ask you to join us. Ambassador Fonseca, will you join us, please? Almost 10 years ago, Leonid Todorov and I, and others here, collaborated together to create a special recognition for Marcus Coomer when he retired as the Executive Secretary of the IGF Secretariat. A few years ago, we also joined together to present a recognition to Ambassador Janis Karklins, who had been the chair of the IGF MAG. Many of you participated in those recommendations.
Ambassador Fonseca has been an extraordinary contributor to the International Governance Forum itself, as well as to the NRIs. He has served in many other roles in the Internet eco-governance.
The interpreters are very sorry, but they have to stop working now. Thank you.
Governmental Advisory Committee, as well as chairing UNCTAD Commission on Science and Technology for Development's working groups on enhanced cooperations. Both were multi-stakeholder itself and benefited greatly from his excellent leadership. During his tenure as ambassador, he has helped to ensure that Brazil hosted the global IGF twice. He has served as a vice chair with the present MAG chair during her inaugural year, and also as a special advisor on engagement with the governments. Also, Mr. Fonseca has played a pivotal role in promoting Net Mundial, a unique multi-stakeholder initiative also spearheaded and hosted by Brazil. Marilyn?
Thank you. We all learned recently that Ambassador Fonseca is taking a different post on behalf of the Brazilian government and will not be continuing his direct engagement and attendance at the IGF and with the NRIs. And while we wish you very well in your new assignment, your consummate diplomatic and professional contributions will be missed by all of us. We have all learned from you as we have worked together. We intend to consider you the role model for the rest of the diplomatic corps as we look forward. In recognition of your contribution and to illustrate how much we all respect and honor you and your statesmanlike leadership and your commitment to the multi-stakeholder engagement of the IGF and the NRIs, we jointly present the third recognition award.
Well, I must say it's a surprise to me, and I am deeply honored to receive that comment. Thank you very much. I'd just like to say that I don't want to take the credit for, I really appreciate receiving the credit for things I've done, but I'd like to also to give credit to what has been done in Brazil by the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee. I think maybe, and I take credit for this, of having incorporated in a way the spirit that, that Brazil has been able to develop for over 20 years through the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee. You have mentioned the first IGF that was held in Rio back in 2007. I was not there at the time. It was an initiative of the committee. I was there the second time we hosted IGF in João Pessoa a few years ago. You may have been there, in Net Mundial as well. I think those were tremendous experiences. Being a professional diplomat, it has been certainly a very enriching experience working in this environment. I had previously worked with environmental issues, climate change, ozone layer, and in those issues, of course, you also need inputs from non-governmental stakeholders. But the institutional format you have developed in IGF and other internet governance-related fora is something unique. It's something we cherish, that we value. As I said before, we think that provides allows for informed decisions, sustainable decisions. It's beneficial from the perspective of government. It's also beneficial from the stakeholders. So it's a win-win game. It's something that should be championed and nurtured. And I really would like, you are honoring me, but I'd like to honor you for engaging this. And I'd like to thank Marilyn Cade and other organizers for this. Thank you very much. It's really an honor for me. I take this as a major moment in all that period I've been involved in internet governance-related issues. Thank you very much.
We are going to take a photo, and I will ask any of the NRIs who can get to the stage in the next 30 seconds to join us, please.